The bank said I owed $623,000 on a mortgage I never signed. Turns out, my sister used my name to buy her dream house. At dinner, I slid the police report. Across the table. Part 1. My name is Naomi Blake. I was 31 years old, working as an intake coordinator at a pediatric clinic in Minneapolis, when I found out I apparently owned a house I'd never seen and was 3 months behind on a mortgage I never signed. The call came in on a Wednesday afternoon. I was finalizing patient records, half listening to my coworker joke about her toddler's latest meltdown when my cell buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something about it just didn't feel like spam. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Miss Blake, this is Nathan from North Lakes Credit Union. I'm calling regarding your past due mortgage on the Highland property. You're 3 months delinquent. I'm sorry, I said, blinking hard. What mortgage? He repeated the amount, $623,000. For a second, I couldn't speak. I lived in a rented one-bedroom near Hennepin Avenue. I had no savings for a down payment, no cosigner, no delusions about homeownership in this economy. This had to be a scam. But then he read the address, Highland Avenue. The name didn't click until it did. My sister, Alyssa, and her husband, Gavin, had moved into a gorgeous craftsman home on Highland just a few months ago. I'd visited once, we'd eaten mousse cake on the patio, and suddenly my body went cold. I ended the call as politely as I could and locked myself in the staff restroom. I pulled up my credit report with trembling fingers. The account was there, my name, my social security number, my address, updated to their house. In that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, and I didn't call my sister. I just stared at my reflection in the mirror, watching my own face shift slowly from confusion to realization. This wasn't a clerical error, it wasn't a joke. Someone had stolen my identity to buy a $600,000 home, and I already knew who. What terrified me most was that the people who raised us would probably beg me not to do a damn thing about it. After the call, everything around me blurred, the clinic's cheerful walls, the sound of children's laughter from the waiting area, even the hum of printers and nurses chatting, all faded into a background I could no longer inhabit. I finished the day on autopilot, smiling when necessary, nodding when prompted, but inside, something had cracked. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat on my worn-down green couch and stared at the ivy spilling over my windowsill. I'd raised those plants from clippings, revived them through Minnesota winters, talked to them on long nights after hard days. My little home wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, uncomplicated, honest, just like how I'd lived. I'd never had much interest in keeping up with anyone, not even Alyssa. She was 3 years older, and from the time we were kids, she was the one with the spotlight, homecoming queen, real estate license by 22, husband with a finance degree, luxury SUV, curated Instagram. And me? I processed new patient intakes and scheduled surgeries. I owned one pair of heels and used my PTO for dentist appointments. I didn't think of myself as boring, I thought of myself as peaceful. But peace doesn't make headlines. At family dinners every other Sunday, we all gathered at my parents' home in St. Paul. Dad would uncork a bottle of Cabernet and declare it too young while Mom set out her famous lasagna, insisting we'd take seconds before we'd even touched our first bites. Alyssa always arrived late and made an entrance, big laugh, big stories, big earrings. She would compliment my shoes, then ask if I'd thought about moving somewhere more grown-up than a rental. I'd laugh it off, I always did. It was easier than explaining how I'd chosen stability over show. They didn't ask much about my life. No one ever said it, but I knew I didn't quite fit their idea of success. I had no ring, no promotion stories, no beachfront vacation photos. I just had bills that I paid on time and a life I wasn't ashamed of. And now, that life was hanging by a thread. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake wondering how long Alyssa had planned this. Had she flipped through my mail while I was in the shower? Taken pictures of my ID while I was setting the table for Christmas dinner? Had Gavin known? Of course he had. He was the one who bragged about knowing how to make paperwork disappear. I was supposed to go over for dinner the coming weekend. Alyssa had texted earlier that week, bringing dessert, "Hope you're still coming for us next month." The audacity of it now made my jaw clench. They were living in a house that had my name on the deed, and I hadn't even been allowed to pick the wallpaper. I showed up at North Lakes Credit Union the next day with my ID, my social security card, and a pit in my stomach so dense it made breathing feel like work. The branch manager, a man named Evan Carlson, met me in a conference room with gray walls and a potted plant that looked too perfect to be real. He slid a folder across the table with a professionalism I both appreciated and resented. Inside were loan documents, closing disclosures, income statements, all with my name, my address, and a signature that almost looked like mine. Almost. This was all processed online, Evan explained, uploaded documents, digital signatures, income verification. The income stated here is generous. I leaned forward. How much? $198,000 a year. I let out a breathless laugh. I make 42. His tone shifted. Miss Blake, if you're saying you didn't apply for this loan, this appears to be fraud, identity theft. You'll need to contact the police and start the dispute process immediately. I want copies of everything, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. As I left the bank, I clutched the folder like a detonator. I didn't go home. I drove to a strip mall coffee shop, ordered a black coffee I didn't drink, and began reading each page like it might tell me how my sister had become a stranger. The next few days blurred into phone calls and quiet rage. I filed a fraud alert with the credit bureaus. My score, once a clean 726, had cratered to 542. There were not just mortgage delinquencies but a home equity line, 3 maxed out credit cards, and a personal loan, all under my name, all linked to an email address off by a few digits, naomi.blake.mpl@gmail.com instead of Naomi. Easy to miss, easy to explain away unless you knew exactly what you were doing. I began searching for proof, the kind that couldn't be laughed off over wine at dinner. A coworker's husband worked in digital forensics and pointed me to a handwriting analyst who compared the mortgage signatures to copies of my real signature for my nursing license and lease agreement. These are forged, he said, clever but forged. Someone is being careful, too careful. Could you testify to that? I could. Then came the part I wasn't proud of. I started snooping. I wasn't technically entitled to look into Alyssa's financial history, but I knew where to look for cracks. Her Instagram might have shown champagne and summer hats, but it also showed too many vacations for a couple who had supposedly just downgraded careers. A friend of mine from college worked at a luxury dealership downtown. She remembered Alyssa coming in to lease a new Mercedes. She looked amazing, but when they ran her credit, it tanked the application. Gavin had to pay in cash. That same friend leaned in and added, he didn't look thrilled about it. Their marriage, once a glossy feature spread in our family's social scrapbook, was fraying. But what stunned me most wasn't the money, it was the intent. They weren't just borrowing against my name, they were setting me up for collapse. Police would later confirm that searches from Gavin's old laptop included terms like declare bankruptcy in someone else's name and can you abandon a stolen identity legally? That wasn't desperation, that was strategy. By the end of the week, I'd gathered enough to make a case, not just to the authorities but to the people who taught me that family comes first. Still, I hesitated, not because I didn't believe they deserved consequences, but because I knew the moment I said the word police, the people who loved us both would ask me to stay quiet. You can click on share more to see if there is a part 2.